We have Cassidy here. She's going to talk about depression in the Army. Go ahead, Cassidy.
So I hope you all are ready for a really uplifting topic, but I wanted to talk to you about depression in the Army today because I think it's very important and it needs to be talked about more. So I'm going to kind of go over what goes on through the minds of the 1%. So next slide, please. So first of all, I wanted to go over what depression is. So it's a serious mental illness that negatively affects how you feel. So basically everything that you attempt to do throughout the day becomes more troubling. So some of the symptoms are changes in appetite, trouble sleeping, like increase in purposeless physical activity. So not wanting to do anything and having no will to do anything. And in extreme cases, it can be thoughts of death or suicide as well. So this is just depression in general, not necessarily specific to the military. So next slide, please. So these are the risk factors for depression in general. Again, the military specifically has a lot more just due to certain factors. But biochemistry is the first one. So a lot of times it has to do with imbalances of the chemicals in the brain. Genetics has a big impact on it as well. Personality and environmental factors. So most of the ones related to the military are caused by environmental factors just due to the high stress environment of the job. So next slide, please. So these are the Army risk factors. Being a single female between 17 and 25 years is actually one of the leading risk factors because females in that age frame are considered more submissive and they don't have as much experience working in a male-dominated field. So therefore they tend to be taken advantage of. And then less than a college education, sexual trauma, childhood physical abuse, and then of course deployment. And deployment is one of the bigger factors that I'm going to go into later in this. So next slide, please. All right, so changes in mental health. So between 2001 and 2011, mostly sparked by the start of 9/11 and the war on terror, rate of mental health diagnosis among active duty service members increased about 65%. Depression specifically made up 62% of this. So on this figure here, you can see depression here is 17% of that total when this study was completed. Okay. Next slide, please. So I also wanted to go over mental health by military service. So I liked this figure because it kind of breaks it down for you. So the Army specifically is listed in green here. So it breaks it down into PTSD, major depression, alcohol dependence, substance dependence, and then overall mental health conditions. So the Army in almost every part of this is the leading military service. So Marines tend to be following behind pretty closely. This is mostly due to the Army has a significantly higher rate of people coming in. So because we have more people just in general, we're going to have higher rates of things. But this is also due because we are the ground force in the military. We have a tendency to have more one-on-one interactions that cause those risk factors previously listed to be more severe. Marines are second because they also tend to have a lot of those, but fields like the Navy, where they may be on boats, in the Air Force, where they may just be in the sky the whole time, they don't have those one-on-one interactions that negatively affect you a lot more severely. Next slide, please.
Hey, Cassidy, I just have a quick question before we go off this slide. Is the incident rate percentage?
Is the what?
Incident rate on the graph here, is that percentage?
Yeah, so that's a relative percentage to overall service.
Okay.
Yes. So I wanted to talk about the extreme cases for the military in general. So major depression, as diagnosed by a psychiatrist, can be grounds for discharge. which is why there's such this negative stigma in the military that weakness or showing any sign of weakness is going to get you kicked out, basically. So this makes them believe that emotional distress is an indication of weakness. And in these instances, if they are flagged with certain things like this, they might not be able to be promoted. They might lose respect of their soldiers, and in the worst case scenario, they might even be kicked out of service, depending on the severity of their depression. So next slide, please. So one interesting study I found that was conducted in 2020 related to hardiness and avoidance coping. So they did a study on 357 male soldiers. So keep in mind this is an all-male study as well. I believe female would change this pretty significantly, but they surveyed combat exposure, depression, avoidance coping, and psychological hardiness. So this was all kind of a relative study because it was done by questionnaire. But 15.4% of these soldiers reported no combat experience at all. The rest of them did have combat experience, which was shown to have like major correlation to high levels of depression. So 16.3% reported some degree of depression, but again, that's just those who reported it. But depression is highest when combat experience is high and hardiness is low. So it was interesting as well that it's the correlation between the two that causes depression to have such a significant impact on people. So it's not just their combat experience, it's their ability to deal with it and handle it. So if their hardiness overall is low, they won't be able to adjust to it and move on. They'll often let it consume them. So next slide, please. So this is suicide rates compared to the civilian population. I couldn't find one solely that compared the Army or veterans in general just to depression, because suicide is a lot more prevalent right now. But because suicide is often the end state of depression, sadly, this compares it to everybody else. So for the northeastern region where we are, is located right in the middle of the chart. Veterans are dark green, and total civilian population is the light green. And you can see in every region of the country and nationally overall, the Army is significantly, well, veteran suicide rate in general is significantly higher. So I thought this was just important to include because as sad as it is, it's the reality for a lot of these people. So next slide, please. So lastly, I kind of wanted to touch on the effect of COVID-19 for those in service. So to date, about 4,000 service members have tested positive since July 1st. So not too many, all things considered, but still significant enough to have an impact. So there's been a 30% increase in anxiety and 36% increase in depression. And interestingly enough, something a lot of people don't think about is this is driven mostly for the fact that there were people still deployed, and they are currently still deployed and couldn't return to their family members. So a lot of the overall depression actually spans from those people that couldn't get back to their families, not necessarily the people here who may even have COVID or their job was affected by it. So I thought that was just an important thing to add. So next slide, please. Are there any questions?
I've got a question.
Sure.